Hello, my name is Doris, and I'm 32 years old. From the outside, my life looked almost perfect. A cozy home tucked inside a quiet neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, a caring husband named Mason, and an 8-year-old son, Martin, who was the brightest part of my world. People who saw us at church on Sundays or in the local park would probably think, they're such a happy family. But they never saw what happened when the doors closed. Every morning began the same way, sunlight spilling through white curtains, the smell of coffee in the kitchen, and a faint tension that always floated in the air like invisible smoke. It came from the woman who ruled this house long before I ever walked through its doors, Mira, my mother-in-law. And where she went, her daughter Nina was never far behind. I used to tell myself that if I just stayed polite, if I just smiled more, they'd learn to love me. But love was something Mira gave in pieces, and only when it suited her. She believed that a daughter-in-law should be quiet, grateful, and invisible. Unfortunately, I was none of those things. At breakfast, if Mason poured coffee for me before his mother, I'd see that flash in her eyes, a spark of something sharp and cold. If I helped Martin with his homework at the dining table, she'd sigh loudly and mutter. In my day, children respected their elders. I learned to ignore it for Martin's sake. He was just a boy, gentle, curious, always wanting to make everyone laugh. He didn't deserve the bitterness that lived in this house. Mason tried to keep peace. He'd squeeze my hand under the table when his mother started complaining, silently asking me to let it go. She'll come around, he'd whisper later at night. She just needs time. But years had passed, and time had only made Myra's resentment stronger. There were small moments that showed me what she really thought. Like the time she accidentally threw away a birthday card Martin had made for me because she thought it was messy. Or the day she told a neighbor, within my hearing, that I was lucky Mason took me in, as if I'd been some lost stray she graciously allowed into her family. Still, I kept my calm. I told myself, be patient. Do it for Mason. Do it for Martin. I didn't realize that patience, when stretched too long, turns into silence, and silence becomes the weapon of those who wish to hurt you. But the real shift began quietly, one evening at a family dinner. That night I saw a different side of Mira. The side that didn't just want to control the house, she wanted to control me. It started with a single cruel comment about my son that sliced through the air like broken glass. And for the first time, I didn't stay silent. That night, I stood up for Martin. I said something that, to Mira, was unforgivable, something that would change the way she looked at me forever. I didn't know it then, but from that moment on, Mira and Nina began waiting, planning, watching for the perfect day to return the humiliation they believed I'd caused. And that day
was my son's birthday.
It happened on a Friday night, one of those big family dinners Mira loved to host. The table was covered with silverware that gleamed under the chandelier, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Everyone was there. Mason, Nina, a few of Mason's cousins, and even some close neighbors. I remember feeling strangely calm that evening, as if the tension that usually lived inside those walls had gone on vacation. Martin sat beside me, his legs swinging under the chair, humming to himself while tracing little circles on the napkin. He was happy, completely unaware of the storm that was about to start. Mira had been unusually quiet during dinner. I should have known that silence from her was never peace. It was the silence before lightning. She watched me and Martin for a long time, her eyes cold, studying us like she was waiting for a reason to attack. It didn't take long. Martin had been trying to tell a story about his school project, something about making a small volcano out of clay and baking soda. His excitement was pure. He spoke fast, his voice rising with joy. And then it exploded, Grandma. Just like a real one. Everyone smiled, except Mira. She cut him off sharply. Martin, she said in that sharp, tight tone, you shouldn't interrupt adults while they're talking. He froze, his small hands curling around his fork. The smile faded from his face. I tried to ease the moment. It's okay, Mira. He's just sharing his project. But she wasn't finished. He talks too much, she said louder, her voice slicing through the room. A boy should learn manners. Otherwise, he'll grow up like his mother, always needing to have the last word. The air left the room. I felt the burn crawl up my throat. Everyone's eyes darted between us, some awkward, some pitying. That was the moment I stopped being silent. I put my fork down slowly and looked her straight in the eye. My voice was calm, but firm. Please don't talk to my son like that in front of everyone. You could have heard a pin drop. The entire room froze. Even a clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Mira blinked, her lips parting slightly. She wasn't expecting me to speak. She looked at Mason, waiting for him to scold me. But Mason said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes flicked between us, lost. I added softly, "He's a child. He meant no harm." But the damage was already done. I could see the fury building behind her perfectly painted smile. She forced a laugh, trying to mask her embarrassment. "Of course, dear," she said, her tone dripping with venom. "I suppose you're the expert on parenting now." Nina giggled, that cruel little sound that always made my skin crawl. "Maybe Mom should take lessons from you," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I didn't respond. I just reached for Martin's hand under the table and gave it a gentle squeeze. I could feel him trembling. All I wanted was to protect him, to make him feel safe again. But to Mira, my calm was insult. My restraint was defiance. After dinner, when the guests began to leave, I overheard her hissing to Nina in the kitchen. She humiliated me. In my own house. In front of everyone. Nina whispered back, "You can't let that slide, Mom. She thinks she's untouchable." I pretended not to hear, but those words stuck in my chest like needles. Over the next few weeks, Myra's coldness grew sharper. She'd ignore me completely, or make subtle digs whenever Mason wasn't around. Nina followed her lead, copying her tone, her sarcasm, her glares. It was as if I had become an outsider in my own home. One evening, while washing dishes, I overheard them again, whispering in the living room. Their voices were low, but the venom was clear. "We'll wait," Mira said. "For what?" Nina asked. "For the right moment," Mira replied. "When everyone's watching. She'll feel what I felt that night." I remember standing there with the water running over my hands, the sound drowning their words, but not the meaning. They wanted revenge. At the time, I brushed it off as anger, words said in frustration. I wanted to believe they wouldn't actually do anything cruel. I was wrong. They were patient. They waited for months. And when the opportunity finally arrived, my son's 8th birthday, they took it. But that night at the dinner table was where it truly began. That was the night my mother-in-law stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as her enemy. By the time spring rolled around, the tension in our house had settled into something I pretended to ignore. Mira and Nina had stopped their constant remarks, stopped their little whispers when I entered the room. On the surface, it felt like peace, but deep down, I knew it was only silence before another storm. Still, when Martin's 8th birthday approached, I wanted to believe in new beginnings. Mason and I spent days planning it. We booked a small catering service, decorated the living room with blue and gold balloons, and ordered his favorite chocolate cake from a bakery downtown. I wanted this birthday to be perfect, the kind of day Martin would remember for all the right reasons. Mira even offered to help, which surprised me. "It's his big day," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with sugar. "Let's make it special." Nina nodded beside her, pretending enthusiasm. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, things were finally changing. Mason seemed hopeful too. He'd wrap his arms around me and say, "See? They're trying. Let's just enjoy the day, okay?" I'd smile. But in my chest, something small and uneasy twisted. There's a certain tone a person uses when they're faking kindness, and both Mira and Nina had mastered it. The morning of the party was warm, sunlight flooding through the windows. Martin woke up before dawn, already bouncing with excitement. He hugged me tight and said, "Mom, today's going to be the best day ever." Hearing him say that made my throat tighten. I prayed silently that he was right. By noon, the house buzzed with laughter, the sound of children running across the backyard. Mason's friends stood near the grill, talking and laughing. Marilyn and Howard arrived carrying gifts and warm smiles. My mother's hug was long, as if she could sense I needed strength. Mira floated around in her elegant blue dress, greeting guests with her polished smile. Nina stood near the dessert table, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be bored. I caught her glancing at me a few times, smirking when she thought I wouldn't notice. But I kept moving, arranging plates, refilling drinks, checking on the kids. I told myself that today wasn't about them. It was about Martin. At one point, Mason came over and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. "You did an amazing job," he said.
He's so happy.
And for a few minutes, everything truly did feel happy. The music played, children laughed, and Martin's smile lit up the whole backyard. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mira and Nina standing by the refreshment table, whispering to each other. Myra's hand rested on a silver tray where a pitcher of hot chocolate sat, still steaming. Nina nodded slowly, her lips curving into something that looked far too pleased. A chill ran through me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just paranoia, the scars of months of tension that wouldn't let me relax. Still, something in my gut told me not to leave Martin alone. When Mira noticed me watching, she flashed that perfect, empty smile. "Doris," she called, "come take a picture with all of us. We should capture this moment." Her voice was smooth, too smooth. I hesitated, but Mason urged me forward.
Go on, he said.
It'll mean a lot to her. So I went. We stood near the cake, everyone smiling for the camera. Mira placed an arm lightly around my shoulders, her touch gentle, her smile flawless. But under her breath, I heard her whisper, so softly only I could catch it. "Enjoy this moment, dear. You'll remember it for a long time." My heart skipped. Something about the way she said it didn't sound like kindness. When the photo was taken, I stepped away quickly. I noticed Nina holding a wrapped gift, small, glassy, shimmering under the light. She walked toward Martin with a sweetness that didn't belong to her, her voice playful. "I brought something very special for you, sweetheart. You have to be extra careful, okay?" And for a fleeting second, I thought, this is it. Whatever they've been waiting for, it starts now. Nina stood near the dessert table, her expression suddenly soft and charming, a mask she wore only when she wanted to be believed. The noise of laughter and children's chatter filled the room as she called out in a sing-song voice, "Martin, sweetheart, come here. I brought you something special." Martin's eyes lit up instantly. He ran toward her, his little hands clapping together. "Really? For me?" he said, his voice bright with excitement. Nina knelt down to his height, smiling sweetly. In her hands was a small box wrapped in shiny blue paper, tied neatly with a silver ribbon. "Of course," she said. "You've grown into such a handsome young man. You deserve something beautiful." I watched from across the room. Something about her tone didn't sit right with me. It was too smooth, too deliberate. Mira stood a few steps behind her, pretending to adjust the decorations on the table, her eyes flicking between Nina and my son with sharp focus. Nina carefully untied the ribbon, lifting the lid from the box as she spoke in a tender, public voice meant for the guests to hear. "This," she said dramatically, "is a very special gift. It's made of crystal, so rare and delicate. You must handle it very carefully, Martin." The light hit the object as she lifted it from the box, a small, glassy figurine shaped like a horse. It glittered beautifully under the chandelier. Gasps and small murmurs of admiration rose from the guests. Martin's face glowed. "It's so cool. Can I hold it?" he asked, bouncing on his feet. "Of course," Nina replied. "Just be gentle, okay?" I moved closer, my heart pounding with unease. Something deep inside me, a mother's instinct, maybe, was warning me that this moment wasn't as innocent as it seemed. But before I could reach them, it happened. As Nina bent to hand the crystal horse to Martin, it slipped, or maybe she let it slip. The figurine fell to the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 sparkling pieces. The sound was sharp, cutting through the laughter and music like glass, slicing silence. For a second, everyone froze. Then Nina gasped loudly and stepped back, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "Oh my God," she cried. "Martin, you dropped it. Do you have any idea how expensive that was?" Martin's little face went pale. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice shaking. "It just—" "You broke it," she snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told you to be careful." Before I could get to them, Mira jumped in, her expression a perfect storm of outrage and false concern. "Nina, calm down," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "He's just a child, though I must say, this behavior keeps repeating, doesn't it?" "What behavior?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the noise. Mira turned to face me, her eyes cold. "You always defend him, Doris. You've spoiled him to the point he doesn't respect anyone, not even his elders." "That's not true," I said sharply. "It was an accident." Nina folded her arms, glaring. "You're teaching him to lie now?" she hissed. I stepped forward to shield my son. "Enough.
Don't talk to my child like that."
The air in the room thickened, guests whispering, tension mounting. I could feel Martin trembling behind me, his little fingers gripping my arm. And that's when it happened. Myra's voice, calm but venomous, sliced through the chaos. "You think you can embarrass me again?" she spat. Before I could react, she reached for the silver pitcher sitting on the table, the one filled with steaming hot chocolate meant for the kids' dessert drinks. I saw her lift it. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her face twisted with fury, her eyes locked on my son. Then, in one horrifying motion, she poured the hot chocolate straight over Martin's head. The gasp that followed was collective. The room erupted in screams as the sweet, dark liquid splashed across my child's face and shirt. Martin shrieked, a sound I'll never forget. And I did the only thing a mother could do. I ran toward him. The moment Mira lifted that silver pitcher, my heart stopped. I shouted her name, but the word barely left my lips before the liquid poured. The hot chocolate cascaded over Martin's hair, down his neck and shoulders, thick and steaming. He screamed, a sound so sharp it sliced through every conversation, every laugh, every beat of the music. The guests froze. The children nearby stopped mid-giggle, their eyes wide with horror. I rushed forward, my feet slipping on the spilled chocolate. "Martin," I cried, grabbing a napkin from the table and pressing it against his head. His little body shook, tears streaming down his red cheeks. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. It's okay."
But nothing about it was okay.
Mira stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with something dark and twisted. "He needed to learn respect," she hissed. "You both did." The room went silent again, the kind of silence that follows a disaster, heavy and suffocating. Everyone could smell the scorched sugar, the faint bitterness of hot cocoa mixing with shame. "Are you insane?" I screamed, still clutching Martin in my arms. "He's a child. You could have burned him." Nina stepped forward then, her voice cold and venomous. "You think you're the perfect mother, Doris? Look what your sweet little boy just did. He ruined my gift, and you let him act like nothing happened. He didn't break it." I yelled back, trembling. "You dropped it yourself." Nina's lips curved into a smirk. "You have no proof." My body was shaking, from rage, from fear, from the sight of my son trembling in my arms. I tried to stand, but before I could take another step, Nina grabbed my wrist. "Don't touch me," I snapped, trying to pull away. But she didn't let go. She shoved me hard. My back slammed against the wall, pain shooting through my shoulder. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs for a moment. Somewhere behind me, the sound of glass clinking echoed, a decoration falling from the shelf. I staggered forward, catching myself against the table. Myra's voice rose again, loud and cruel. "This is what happens when you disrespect your elders." The words rang through my skull. Around us, people started whispering, some trying to intervene, others too stunned to move. My mother, Marilyn, screamed from the other side of the room, "Call 911. Someone call 911. And that's when Mason came running. He had been outside with a group of guests, laughing near the grill. The second he heard Martin scream, He dropped everything and sprinted in. When he saw me, the chocolate dripping from Martin's hair, my back against the wall, Myra's shaking hands clutching the empty pitcher, something in him broke. "What the hell happened?" he shouted, his voice booming across the room. Nina stuttered. She's overreacting. Martin. But before she could finish, Mason turned toward his mother. "You did this." Myra's lips parted. He deserved. He didn't let her finish. "You poured hot chocolate on our son?" His voice cracked. "On your own grandson?" Every guest stared. Some had their phones out now, recording, whispering. Myra's face twisted, half anger, half panic, as she tried to explain herself, but Mason had already pulled Martin from my arms. He looked down at the child shaking against his chest, and then at me. My hands were trembling, my forehead slick with sweat, my body aching where Nina had pushed me. "Enough," he said quietly, a calm that was more terrifying than a scream. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed. "This is Mason Carter," he said, his voice steady but shaking with fury. "I need the police and an ambulance at my address. My mother assaulted my wife and poured hot liquid on my child." Mira gasped. "Mason, you can't." "Don't," he said sharply, his voice rising. "Don't say another word." The sirens came quickly, flashing red and blue against the windows of our Dallas home. Paramedics rushed in, helping Martin as I held his small hand. They said the burns were mild, mostly shock and redness, but the pain was real. As they examined him, 2 officers walked up to Mira and Nina. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one said firmly. Mira looked around desperately, as if someone would save her. "You can't arrest me. I'm his grandmother." The officer didn't flinch. "And that's what makes it worse, ma'am." When they led Mira and Nina out, the room was utterly silent. Martin leaned into me, exhausted and crying. I held him close, my tears finally breaking free. Mason knelt beside us, his arm around my shoulders. "It's over," he whispered. But in that moment, surrounded by shattered glass, spilled chocolate, and the sound of fading sirens, I wasn't sure if anything would ever truly be over. When the paramedics carried Martin to the ambulance, I followed close behind, barely able to breathe. His small hand clutched mine so tightly that my fingers went numb. "Mom," he whimpered, "did I do something wrong?" Those words tore me apart. I brushed the damp curls off his forehead and whispered, "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. None of this was your fault." Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the street. Neighbors peeked from their porches, their curious eyes wide with shock. Dallas nights were usually quiet, but now the air buzzed with tension, sirens, and murmured confusion. Mason stood by the police car, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. He looked like a man who had just realized the truth he'd been denying for years. The officers had already spoken to him. Now they were talking to Mira and Nina, who stood near the porch, trying to twist the story into something that made them the victims. "I didn't mean for it to spill," Mira said, her voice trembling, part fear, part pride. "He was out of control. He broke the gift." The younger officer, a calm woman with sharp eyes, interrupted her. "Ma'am, multiple witnesses saw you lift the pitcher and pour it over the child. That's not an accident." Nina chimed in, her tone frantic. "She didn't do it on purpose. It just slipped." Mason stepped forward, his voice steady but full of restrained fury. "No, officer. I saw it. I saw both of them." She poured it deliberately, and Nina pushed my wife when she tried to stop it. The officer nodded and turned to the second policeman, who quietly radioed something in. "Understood," he said. I stood a few feet away, shaking. The house lights glowed behind us, warm and soft, mocking the chaos that had just happened inside. I watched as Myra's face turned from defiance to disbelief. For the first time, she seemed to realize that this time, Mason wasn't going to protect her. She took a step toward him. "Mason, please. You don't understand." But Mason raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence.
"No, Mom.
"You don't understand. I've spent years defending you, hoping you'd change. But tonight, I saw exactly who you are. His voice cracked, but he didn't falter. You could have hurt my son. My family. Nina began to cry, clutching her mother's arm. You can't arrest us. We're family. The female officer took a breath, her tone professional but firm. You're being charged with child endangerment and assault. You'll have the right to an attorney. She gestured for the other officer to proceed. When they placed handcuffs on Myra's wrists, she gasped in outrage. How dare you treat me like a criminal? Mason's voice was low, tired, and final. Because that's what you became tonight. The crowd of guests that had gathered at the edge of the lawn whispered quietly. Some took out their phones, recording. The flashing lights reflected off Myra's face as she turned toward me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Hate, fear, maybe even regret. You did this, she spat. You turned my son against me. I didn't reply. I just held Martin closer as the officers guided her and Nina into the car. The doors shut, and for the first time in years, silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like freedom. Mason walked over, his eyes glistening. They're gone, he said quietly. They'll be charged first thing in the morning. The police said they have enough witnesses and evidence. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I just want Martin to be okay. He will be, Mason said, pulling me close. We both will. As the police cars drove away, the sirens fading into the distance, I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint above the Dallas night, but they were there, shining through the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, the worst was finally behind us. The trial began 3 months later in a courtroom in downtown Dallas, a place I had never imagined stepping into, let alone because of my own family. The days leading up to it were heavy with anxiety. Reporters had caught wind of the case. Grandmother and aunt charged in child endangerment became a headline on local news. When I walked into the courtroom that first day, my palms were sweating. Mason held my hand tightly, Martin's small fingers intertwined with mine. He was healing well, physically, at least. The burns had faded, leaving only faint pink patches on his neck. But sometimes, when he woke up at night crying, I knew the emotional scars ran deeper. Mira sat at the defendant's table beside Nina, both dressed in somber colors that didn't match the rage in their eyes. Their lawyer spoke softly to them, but they barely listened. Myra's gaze kept darting toward me, sharp and bitter, like she still couldn't accept that her actions had consequences. The prosecution presented everything: the police report, photos, witness testimonies from the guests who had seen it all. Even the video footage one guest had recorded on her phone played on a screen for everyone to see. In that moment, I had to look away. Seeing Mira lift the silver pitcher again, watching Martin scream, hearing my own voice echo in the background, it was too much. When it was my turn to testify, I stood at the witness stand and tried to steady my voice. I didn't want any of this, I said quietly. I just wanted peace. But that night, they didn't just hurt my son. They broke something that can never be repaired. Mason testified next. His voice was firm, but his heartbreak was clear. I kept believing my mother would change, he told the court. But love doesn't excuse cruelty. Not when it comes to your child. After 2 long weeks of hearings, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Mira was found guilty of child endangerment and assault, and sentenced to 3 years in state prison with no early release. Nina was convicted of assault causing bodily harm and received 18 months in county jail. The moment the judge read the sentence, a ripple of relief went through the courtroom. Myra's face went pale. She turned toward Mason, her voice breaking. You're really going to let them do this to your mother? Mason didn't answer. He simply took my hand and stood up, his silence saying everything. As the officers led them away, Mira glanced back one last time, not in apology, but in disbelief that her control was truly gone. Outside the courthouse, the warm Texas wind brushed against my face. Martin hugged my waist and whispered, "Is it over now, Mom?" I looked down at him and smiled softly. Yes, baby. It's finally over. For the first time in years, I felt weightless, like the air around me wasn't filled with fear anymore, but with the promise of peace. 3 months after the verdict, life in our home began to breathe again. The echoes of that night still lingered, sometimes in Martin's dreams, sometimes in the quiet moments when I'd catch Mason staring into space. But slowly, warmth began to replace the emptiness that Mira and Nina had left behind. One sunny Saturday morning, Mason walked into the kitchen with a mischievous smile. "I was thinking," he said, "we never got to finish Martin's birthday." I looked up from the pancakes I was flipping. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. The party. The laughter that had turned into screams. Mason continued, his voice soft but hopeful. "He deserves to have that memory, the one we wanted for him, not the one they tried to destroy." And just like that, we decided to redo it. Not grand, not crowded, just family. Just love. That afternoon, we set up balloons again, this time in the backyard. Marilyn and Howard arrived with gifts and homemade pie. Mason grilled burgers while I helped Martin hang a banner that said, "Happy 8.5 birthday." A little joke that made him giggle endlessly. There were no fancy decorations, no unwanted guests, no tension in the air. Just the sound of laughter, the smell of summer, and the glow of peace we hadn't felt in years. When the cake came out, chocolate again, of course, I lit the candles and knelt beside Martin. His little face glowed in the flickering light. "Make a wish," I whispered. He closed his eyes for a long moment, then looked up at me and said, "I already got it, Mom. You and Dad are happy again." I couldn't hold back my tears. Mason put his arm around me, pressing a kiss against my temple. "We're a family," he said quietly. "That's all that matters." As Martin blew out the candles, the tiny flames went out in a soft puff, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear in the dark. I felt peace. The night ended with laughter echoing through the backyard, fireflies blinking against the Dallas sky, and a promise that we'd never let pain define us again. Sometimes, when I think back to that night, the screaming, the broken glass, the smell of burnt chocolate, it feels like another lifetime. But it also reminds me how quickly love can turn into control when pride takes over. I learned something through all of it. That silence may keep the peace for a while, but it also gives cruelty room to grow. The moment I found my voice, the moment I chose to protect my son, no matter the cost, everything changed. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it gave us the strength to move forward. It taught me that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it hurts. Now, when I watch Martin play or see Mason smile without that shadow in his eyes, I know we survived something dark and came out stronger. Because family isn't defined by blood or tradition. It's defined by love and the courage to protect it. My name is Doris, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that silence can be the loudest cry for help. For years, I stayed quiet, thinking patience could heal what cruelty had broken. But love without respect isn't peace, it's surrender. The night my son was hurt changed everything. It stripped away every illusion I had built to keep my world looking perfect. It forced me to face a truth I had ignored, that sometimes the people who call you family are the ones who hurt you the most. And when that happens, standing up for yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. When I looked at my son crying in my arms, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to become his voice, and mine. I learned that justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the dignity someone tried to steal from you. Today, I'm not just a wife or a mother. I'm a woman who found her strength in the middle of her pain. And if you're watching this, wondering whether it's too late to fight for yourself, let me tell you, it never is. Stand up. Speak out. Protect what's pure in your life. Because no matter how dark the night feels, truth always finds its way to the light. Thank you so much for watching the story till the end. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more emotional, realistic, and inspiring stories every week. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what part of this story touched you the most. See you in the next one.